And so God's people should sing songs that are true, and as we do, God can use those gospel-saturated lyrics to pierce the hearts of those who do not believe. I don't remember the exact person, but I remember a story when I was, in church up in New Jersey. There were several people, and probably, many of you can relate, of knowing people who were converted, or God started to maybe open their eyes in a particular way through the, hearing a hymn or sort of other truthful Christian song, and that really God used those means to save them or sort of start down that spiritual awakening. Number 4, when the church gathers together, non-Christians can see the gospel displayed. And so before Christ ascended to heaven, he entrusted 2 ordinances to his church. I know we've hit on this in other classes, other places, so not a trick question. Can anyone say what the 2 ordinances are? Exactly, Frank. I didn't even have to call on you. You called me. Raise your hand next time. No, it's okay. Good job. That was good. Telling Frank, I get some of the teacher techniques. I was like telling Lindsay I should put popsicle sticks with everyone's name in a little cup and pull it out, and so yeah. Thankfully, I don't think we'll have to get to that point, but as we know, has been talked about before, and thankfully is something talked about here often. Both baptism and the Lord's Supper are pictures of the gospel. And when a non-Christian sees these 2 ordinances being carried out, they're witnessing a clear picture of what it means to be born again, to obey and follow Christ. And when people join our church, obviously depending on the past background, that sometimes includes baptism, but it always, as of last week, and unfortunately I think it was last week, wasn't here, but Lindsay relayed the testimonies to me. We always have people share their testimonies, and they share how Christ intersected their, destructive, kind of entered into that life, their destructive, hell-bound life, and redeemed them and rescued them from their sins. And I know, some in our mind, in our sort of human minds, I think we look at some of these stories, and in some way they are maybe more dramatic. But there was a quote, I wish I could remember where I heard it, where I found it, but the essence was, every time God takes, a hell-bound person and saves them, that is an amazing, incredible miracle of a story. Even if it's someone who never had any, major outwardly, wayward life of sin, someone who maybe grew up in a Christian household and, did good was saved even as a child, like that is still an incredible miracle of God. And I think there's a place and can be inspiring where, just the amazing nature of God too, where you can take people who were, seemingly so far, off in a path of sin and, radically transform them. But all of these stories are incredible. And, hearing these very testimonies are really, can be a great sort of source of encouragement, and strong message for non-believers, and really display the gospel. And in the same way, when a non-Christian sees the gathered church come to the Lord's table to partake of the Lord's Supper, they really see a clear picture of what it means to obey and follow Christ. That Christians are people who have fellowship with the Lord through the sacrifice of his body and the shedding of his blood. That we take sin seriously. We rest in Christ's substitutionary atoning sacrifice with joy-filled hearts, and they will hear the pastor explain that this meal is reserved only for those who have been born again and are trusting in the finished work of Jesus Christ. And for someone who is, unregenerate, fencing them off from the table may seem judgmental and unloving, but in reality is actually one of the most loving things a church can do. And I'll reference a verse in a second, but I remember, I think before going to church, before I think I was really a Christian, some church, I go there's different opinions, and I think there's room for disagreement exactly on the language of who can, partake in the Lord's Supper and member here or this or that. But I remember being in churches where it was sort of just open to anyone. There was no qualification on that, and I think it didn't strike me as meaningful in a way that in the way sometimes presented here, that, if you're not a Christian, if you haven't, submitted to Christ or you've rejected Christ, you should pass the elements by that. That the sort of that idea of that separation that you have chosen, but that Christ is open to you. Someone read this verse from 1 Corinthians, and why showing that not allowing or requesting that non-believers not partake in the Lord's Supper is actually not a judgmental thing, but really a loving thing. Oh, Kim?
Whoever therefore eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty concerning the body and blood of the Lord. Let a person examine himself then, and so eat of the bread and drink of the cup. For anyone who eats and drinks without discerning the body eats and drinks judgment on himself. That is why many of you are weak and ill, and some have died.
So by having non-believers not participate in the Lord's Supper, at least as far as taking the bread and the cup, we're really protecting someone from drinking judgment on themselves. And it would be just in the same way, it's really unloving for Christians to proclaim that all people are good with God when really, in fact, that they're not. And I think that's a lot of our culture, not wanting to, quote, hurt people or offend people or just with the truth. But it's really, and even those hard truths, when not spoken, can really be unloving. But by rightly preaching, teaching, singing, baptizing, and serving the Lord's Supper, the church proclaims clearly to the world the line that Christ has drawn between those who are right with him and those who aren't. So non-Christians can see the gospel displayed through baptism and the Lord's Supper. And number 5, the last of this section, when the church gathers together, non-Christians can see the gospel lived out. And I'm sure many of you have heard people complain about the church. I know none of us have ever had any sort of complaint about anything going on in a church. It's only other churches who do that, right? And some people say, I believe God, but I don't believe in church as something created by man, not God. And oftentimes Christians are accused of being hypocrites who don't practice what they preach. And to a certain extent, that's true, since 100% of Christians are sinners. And from time to time, churches and those claiming to represent the church have, unfortunately, horribly misrepresented Christ in a variety of ways. But we have to recognize that the church is still one of the best evangelistic tools that God has given us. We hear this verse in John 13. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. And so if we really listen to that, Jesus said that when we love each other and serve each other, Jesus shows who he is and who he says he is to a watching world. Or there's another verse in 1 Peter, keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. Or in a similar way, if I could get someone to read the longer one here, John 17. Mike, thanks. So, even with all, obviously churches are just groups of people who are sinners. There's the joke I've heard, if you find the perfect church, don't join it because it won't be perfect anymore, or some of these little trite sayings. But the local church really makes gathering, or the church gathering makes the invisible kingdom of Christ visible. And it's one of those things people have to see to believe. That in the church, you have people from every tribe, tongue, nation, economic situation, political affiliation, all come together in peace, in love, for really all of these things that would seemingly divide people or keep people from being together, and yet they're all there for Christ, really, and that is the most important unifying thing in a way that the world really can't explain. And really only a supernatural work of God and the Spirit can create something like the local church. So we'll move on to section 2 here, but before that, are there any questions, any comments? Anyone want to chime in with anything? All right. So section 2 here, incorporating the corporate gathering in evangelism, or how to use the corporate gathering in our personal evangelism. And so we've talked about how the corporate gathering both proclaims and pictures the gospel to non-Christians. And what I have next is just 4 simple things of ways to use this gathering to help our personal evangelism. And so first, when we talk about the church, we should speak highly of it. This point is short and simple, but in our conversations with non-Christians, we should talk about the way the Lord has blessed us through the local church. And again, sadly, many people have come from backgrounds where the church has not rightly proclaimed and protected the gospel, and because of it, they may have a kind of low view of organized religion. And many people who've had bad experiences with their local church or have been hurt by professing Christians are now very cautious and guarded about church because they're afraid of being hurt again, and those feelings are valid, obviously. And so when we're talking with people who are in their everyday life, we can, not be untruthful, but just talk about the way that God has blessed us through the relationships and the lessons that the Lord has been showing us through His Word and through the church. We all know it's really easy to criticize, it's really easy to nitpick. None of those things are really helpful or glorifying to God, but we can talk to people just, about how we have been blessed through the local church. Number 2 is invite non-Christians to church. And that's one of the easiest things we can do. Invite family, invite friends, coworkers, neighbors. And there's a few things to consider, I think, to just help make the most of that visit. One of them, just to set expectations. Just when you invite them, it can be a kind thing. To invite someone to anything where they're walking in not knowing people or really what the setting is going to be, what to expect. Some people can be intimidated coming to a new place, especially a church. Just telling them what to expect can help them feel more comfortable and prepared. In fact, I was looking back. Unfortunately, it was one of these iPhone things. I deleted this thread accidentally like a couple years ago, but I had it for a long time when I was living up in New Jersey and met this couple that ultimately, they were attending Trinity Baptist Church up in New Jersey, and I don't know if I was saved there. That is where the fruit in my life became more evident, so I'm not sure exactly what was happening before, but I remember looking back at the text thread the day before I was going to visit the first time and texting this guy, Courtney, like, hey, what's the dress code? Like, what should I wear? Like, being, prepared and kind of having the expectations set, but being able to kind of trace back. So, setting expectations. I think also just prepping with prayer, that we can ask a few other members if we know, hey, so-and-so is coming, whether in our home groups or, hey, we know someone's going to come next week, bringing that up or texting out to some people or messaging or whatever that, hey, I know this person is visiting. Can we all pray that, this time in church would really have a gospel impact on them? Also, obviously any service can be great to visit someone to or to invite someone to, but times where there is, something like a testimony or something like that where they can really hear the power of that, like Dale talked about last week at the funeral, I think that can have a very powerful impact on non-believers as well. Number 3 then is we should talk with our non-Christian friends about what they experienced at church. So after the service, take the opportunity, ask for their thoughts on what they heard and what they saw. An easy way to do this, if you've already arranged for them maybe to join you and other people to go out for lunch or go out to dinner over your house, there's obviously a variety of different ways this can happen. And during this time, your friend will be able to see the gospel lived out and just to have conversation with other believers. And also when you follow up with them, just make sure you thank them for coming to church. For some people, depending on their background and who they are, like for us it may seem, it's no big deal, I'm just kind of visiting a church. Like this could be a huge leap for some people where they don't come from any kind of church background, or whether they're someone who previously had a church background and there's a lot of in a negative way, the baggage there, simply coming back into a church can be a pretty big deal. Number 4 is we should invite non-Christians just to hang out with us and our Christian friends. Again, another simple but important part of personal evangelism. Invite unbelieving friends to just join us in our everyday lives, whether some kind of party or sport or game or movie or going out to eat, there's a lot of different ways, but just ways to invite non-Christians to come along so they can see the gospel lived out among other believers. And, with these, I think, thinking intentionally about how to, create discussion, sort of make the most out of that time. I know we don't do it enough, but times when my unbelieving family comes down, Lindsay and I talk, how can we take things below the surface? How can we have intentional moments of real conversation about spiritual things? And so we can think, what are some ways you can hang out with Christian friends? Do we make time to hang out with non-Christian friends? What are some things to consider if non-Christians ask you to hang out with them and their friends? How might this be different from you inviting them out? And obviously I think there's probably certain settings where we just have to respectfully decline, but there's others where, it can be appropriate. There might be things where maybe it makes sense, bring a Christian friend, and just having wisdom in a lot of these interactions. And then lastly, just how the church encourages us to faithful evangelism. So first, the local church is to evangelize. At the beginning of our lesson, I mentioned some people think pastors should be the evangelists and we should just bring non-Christians to hear them speak. But this is not what the New Testament teaches. And the Bible is very clear that all Christians are called to proclaim the gospel and that our pastor should be equipping us to evangelize, not doing it for us. And that's, sort of speaking, that's the reason why we're even having this class here. Ephesians 4:11-12 said, "And he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds and teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ." The training of the church to the work of ministry is one of the primary responsibilities of the pastor, but it's actually the reverse of the misconception we started with, that the labor of the pastor is to feed the Christians so that they, thus in the body, can take the gospel out into the world each week. And again, that's why we're having this class, so that it can equip all of us to go out and proclaim the gospel. And something we should all remember is that God has equipped each of us to proclaim the gospel in our way, with our gifting, in our circle and influence of the people that we know. That you are who you are and where you are for a reason. That your evangelism doesn't have to look like someone else's evangelism, that God has placed you there to make his name known, and the job of the pastor is to help you to be ready to do that. But kind of going back to earlier lessons too, we can also rest that, if I have, because I think sometimes you could take that overboard too, that, well, God has placed me to interact with this person. What if they're the only Christian that they're ever going to meet in their entire life, and if I don't say something, like that's going to have an eternal consequence on their soul? We can mess ourselves up and think, okay, well, God is still in control. God is sovereign. We're equipped to share the gospel. We want to be intentional with that, but ultimately, God is in control of someone's salvation. And it's not, if we take advantage or don't take advantage of an opportunity, it doesn't rest all on us. Number 2, the local church provides opportunity for evangelism. So most of our evangelism should flow from our relationships with the non-Christians God placed around us. But in God's kindness, we can also look to our local church for other opportunities to share. And while this is going to be different in every local church, the church can provide opportunities to help you evangelize. And obviously, in the past, and this is sort of getting reimagined and looking for more, but we've had ministries that continue to grow and change and evolve, where beyond simply the interaction with people in our daily life, and things like going to homeless shelters and jails and some of these other places, opportunities to evangelize. And really any one of us can be a part of something like that, or start something like that, or organize that, and can be just a great encouragement to just co-labor with other people in one of these efforts. Number 3, the local church encourages us to evangelize. Another great advantage of doing evangelism in the context of a local church is that we help each other to be faithful in evangelism. Hebrews 10 says, "And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. Let us not give up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but let us encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching." That's even why I wanted to open up with just asking stories did anyone share, because I think it can encourage each other. Like, Kelly, you say someone who did your hair? So the lady who does my hair, I'm pretty much 100% sure she's not a Christian, and we've never had gospel conversations. It's like, oh, next time I'm there, there's ways I can open that door, things like that. It can maybe open our minds to people that we have overlooked or just dealt with in a particular way for months or even years. And sometimes hearing someone else have a gospel conversation with someone with that kind of relationship can maybe open our eyes and help us just to be more intentional. So really, in conclusion, the local church here at New Life should be a supplement to our personal evangelism, not a substitute for us. And it's really a spiritual discipline that we shouldn't neglect, that we're all commanded, that God, again, has equipped all of us in unique ways to be able to reach lost people, to expand his kingdom. And so we can continue to pray for God to help us to love lost people, to open doors for the gospel, to invite people for church or to church here, and to think of what are settings that I could invite a non-Christian into. So as we're wrapping up here, is there any other questions or comments or anything like that? Yeah.
Related to Ephesians 4, where God gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, pastors, teachers, should we have, or should we appoint evangelists like we appoint pastor teachers?
So I think it's probably, we were thinking about missionaries and things like that. When we think of a missionary who's going out to new places to be an evangelist. So I think the church should be seeing that. So that's like that missionary type of idea. But you could maybe see that as a local church or just someone in this area. I think the idea of the prophets and the apostles, like this is receiving the word of God, the evangelist taking the word out. So if we particularly got scripted, I think that picture was going and that hurt. So I mean, I don't think it's necessarily wrong to say if you have somebody on staff who's really an outreach leader, an evangelist leader, particularly get to I might be a missionary outfit, but yeah, I don't think that's really appropriate if you have that kind of context and you have just a good leader and then be on staff
And I think maybe I'll just speak for myself, for most of us, it's just easier sometimes, all the time, not to say anything. It just takes a little bit of work, takes some intentional thinking about how to, interact with someone, start a conversation with someone, steer. I think we can keep these things more top of mind, really think about people's eternal soul, eternal condition, think about the love of Christ in our own life and what Christ has done for us. These are maybe some of the things that can help us just, and obviously with prayer, get over the, what's this person going to say, or I'm tired, or it's just easier, in this setting not to say anything, to get over those humps a little bit. Lindsay? Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, until God saves, any of our children, there are unbelievers in our homes every day. And until they reach a certain age, they're a very captive audience as well. So, um, Jared.
Kind of going back to the incorporating corporate gathering and evangelism aspect, we've seen many churches go way off the rails as far as going kind of seeker sensitive in a lot of ways. But are there possibly some things we would take into consideration with the way that we structure our worship service to be more sensitive towards visitors who may be willing to hear and listen at all? Or do we really focus on the fact that the church is for the church, and that's really where we need to make sure that things are structured? If people come in and hear, that's great, but we're not really going to change the way that we do church because the church is for the church.
Probably outside of Alex's purview.
Yeah. I mean, something that comes to mind, even you could say even like, that was for people in the church too. I mean, even having like something like a nursery is maybe some sort of accommodation. Obviously, it's for members, but people who may come in with children. But I think there's room certainly for thinking when things are done, how they're done, timing of service. Like I think all of those things probably have been taken into account as we're thinking for the membership, but also to accommodate other people as well. So I don't know if you want to chime in.
Today, when we take the Lord's Supper, there's certainly a part that we'll discuss where we say, just as Alex was saying, this isn't for you, but Christ is for you. It's the same message that we give our kids. Yeah, don't take this today, but Christ is for you today. And so I think there's definitely verbiage that I think permeates when Paul and I talk, that we say, we try to be very diligent in saying, Christian, this is for you. If you're not a Christian, it's not for you. I think that permeates a lot of what we preach. We're open to do things differently within some boundaries. We have theological boundaries that we have. I think the biggest thing we can do is create cultures of welcome, of openness, of acceptance of differences. Like we purposely don't have children's church, we don't have manpower, and we really are not eager to do a children's church. That's something that someone coming in without children, they're nervous about that. Kids are acting out. But we have a welcoming spirit, so we're not getting upset when kids are acting out. We're welcoming that. We're saying that we want you here, we want you to grow. So as we have a perspective of comfort, of welcome, of eagerness to share the gospel, that's what we can do as a body. As long as we're focusing on being clear, talking about why we're doing what we're doing, being clear about what we're doing, we're helping them understand what we're doing. But we're doing things for a purpose. But the biggest thing we can do as a culture is welcome others with gospel love so they can understand the reality of what we're doing. And then they're loved enough to hear the gospel and see the gospel is for them. There's not a shame. They don't have to clean themselves up before they fit in. They don't have to get fixed before they come in. But they're welcomed as they are. And then the gospel will work on them. That's the culture that we can contribute to. And those are good things for us to always be thinking through. So anybody has ideas about ways we can do that, share them with us. And we'll consider within the bounds of what we have convictional things we're doing. But we want to be as open as we can. But there's definitely an awareness that we both have that we don't know what state a lot of people are going to be coming in with. We've been getting a ton of visitors, which is great. We've been very welcoming to them. I think everybody's done a great job with that. But we don't know what kind of state their soul is in. And during the preaching, during the singing, we have to be very aware of like, hey, they may hear this. We do not want to give the view to a non-Christian that they're part of us yet, unless they have put their faith in Christ. But we want to be welcoming of that, winsome of that. So.
Okay. Yeah. Gary, I think we got time for a last comment. Want to chime in? Who knows? All right. Ron?
Praying at all times in the Spirit with all prayer and supplication, that him, alert with all perseverance and supplication for all the saints. And also praying for me, that words may be given to me in opening my mouth boldly to proclaim the mystery of the gospel, which I'm an ambassador in chains, that I may declare it boldly as I ought to speak. So prayer makes all the difference, obviously. And each one of us praying before we evangelize, but also having, as I think you mentioned earlier, that was mentioned again, I think, others need to be praying for our personal interactions, our personal, and we need boldness. It's not always natural.
Absolutely. Well, I will pray to close our time together here now. Father in heaven, we thank you again for this time we can be together just to learn and grow together on aspects of how to equip and empower all of us